Welcome to Pedo Teeth Talk, brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, a podcast show that delivers cutting-edge ideas for the professionals specializing in pediatric dentistry.
Thank you for tuning in to Pedo Teeth Talk, where we bring you the contemporary issues important to you and your practice. Brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. Thank you to our Pedo Teeth Talk sponsor, Hugh Freedy, for helping us bring you great content. We couldn't do this without them. Visit them at www.hughfreedy.com. That's HU-FRIEDY.com. We're here today with John Rosemond, the premier expert in the subject of parenting and how it has changed over many years. John Rosemond is an American columnist, public speaker, and author on parenting. His weekly parenting column is syndicated in approximately 225 newspapers, and he has authored 15 books on the subject. John Rosemond grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in the suburbs of Chicago. He attended Western Illinois University with a master's degree in community psychology. At Western Illinois University, Rosemond sang lead in a popular campus band, where he met his future wife at a concert. From 1971 to 1980, John worked as a psychologist and program director at various mental health centers in Illinois, Iowa, and North Carolina. He began writing his newspaper column in 1976 while director of the early intervention program at Gaston Lincoln Mental Health Center in Gastonia, North Carolina. In 1978, the Charlotte Observer purchased the column and put it into syndication a year later. From 1980 to 1990, Rosemond was in private practice as a family psychologist. John is married and has two children, Eric and Amy. He is licensed as a psychological associate in the state of North Carolina, and I am incredibly honored to have John Rosemond, who most of us in pediatric dentistry are well aware of and whose advice should influence us and give us some great value every day. So, John, thanks for being with me today. I wanted to start by saying, when you and I talked earlier, I said to you, having read so much of your work, that shouldn't we just call our specialty parent dentistry instead of pediatric dentistry?
Yes, well, I'm aware from, it's an interesting thing. I was first informed in 1992, Joel, when a group of pediatric dentists came from Colorado to my office in Gastonia, North Carolina, where I lived at the time, and told me that the new thing, if you will, in pediatric dentistry was to have the parents come back. And I said, well, you guys are making a huge mistake because you don't understand the psychology of today's parents and specifically today's mother. And of course, when I start talking about women in their role as mothers, it's a very politically incorrect swamp that I am potentially stepping into. But the fact of the matter is that today's mother, her psychology is very, very different from the psychology of, say, my mother. My mother took me to the dentist's office in downtown Chicago, Dr. Shapiro. She dropped me off on LaSalle Street, wherever she could. I walked the rest of the way, took the elevator up, and I was 10, 11, 12 years old. I was doing this. My mother never came to my dental appointment. She had better things to do than sit in the waiting room. But today's mother believes that without her oversight over her child, something could go wrong. And the something is, in her mind, apocalyptic.
I see. So apocalyptic meaning today's mother feels she needs to be there to take control of the situation. Is that a fair way to make sure things don't go wrong?
Absolutely, that she needs to be there to take control of the situation, whatever the situation is. And the more likely the situation is to cause her child any discomfort whatsoever, the more urgent she feels about the need to be there. She feels the need to mediate all such encounters that her child has. And this is a function, Joel, of the fact that we shifted in the late 1960s, there was a culture-wide paradigm shift concerning parenting. We just the psychological community in America became the informer where the raising of children was concerned. And mind you, I'll remind our listeners, I am a psychologist licensed by the state of North Carolina. And the psychological community began to inform how children were raised in America and began to create the impression that any feeling a child had was a valid experience. And my mother did not believe that. My mother believed that children need to be disciplined in their emotions. Children need to be disciplined in their thinking. Children need to be disciplined, yes, in their behavior, but behavior is really all we're thinking about in America today.
So we focus on training kids academically. We want them to study and work hard, but we fail on the emotional training. Is that a fair way of saying it, of preparing them emotionally?
Exactly. This is why teenagers and young adults are having so many problems with at an emotional level with events, circumstances that kids, 50 years ago, when I was that age, didn't have really a problem with. This is why we have safe spaces on college campuses. This is why the studies are finding that young adults in America today lack what is called emotional resilience, because every emotional circumstance, or, not every, I'm engaging in a little hyperbole here, has been mediated by an adult who has tried to make everything better. Well, my mother believed, and I'm using her as an example of what parenting was like because she was a single parent for most of the first 7 years of my life. My mother believed, to use some vernacular here, that children are soap opera factories and that they are prone to emotional exaggeration, and their emotions need to be triaged, not simply indiscriminately treated as important events.
So I'm going to come to that point a little bit later. I mean, this is so much valuable stuff, and anything that we're talking about, I could go on for hours with you, John, just to pick your brain. You have so much expertise. I've heard you talk about the change that's occurred in parenting, specifically as it relates to, instead of training kids to be good citizens, to creating children who have good self-esteem. How did this occur? And I think we're seeing the implications of this. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, it occurred because we began listening to people like me tell us how to raise kids. We began listening to people who possessed capital letters after their names, mostly representing various disciplines within the mental health professions. This started in the late 1960s. It gained momentum through the 70s and 80s. And the mental health community was stressing, and this was sort of presented to American parents as really the brass ring of childhood, was to obtain esteem for oneself. And I was one of the first people in America through my syndicated newspaper column, by the way, I'll take a little credit here to say, no, this is not a good idea because, and I said it long before the research confirmed it, that high self-esteem was very likely to be associated with a lack of respect for others and specifically authority figures. And sure enough, the research has confirmed that the relationship between high self-esteem and respect for others is what economists call a zero-sum proposition. That as a person's esteem for himself goes up, a person's respect for others goes down. And this is why the research has found, for example, that women who are in relationships with men with high self-esteem are very likely to be the target of abuse. Because it's an entitlement mentality, Joel. Mm-hmm. People with high self-esteem believe what they want, they deserve to have. And because they deserve it, the ends justify the means. Well, that's a sociopathic, very, very dangerous mentality to bring to a social situation, and particularly one that involves intimacy.
So it sounds like parents may be confusing what they call or what they intend to be doing, creating self-esteem with self-confidence and quality. And it's not about confidence. Self-esteem is more about selfishness in the way you're describing it. Is that fair?
Well, it's about selfishness. It's about the idea that my dispositions, if you will, in any given situation should rule. And in a relationship, my disposition should rule. And the way that translates for children is that children today are not being corrected the way that they should be corrected. And the American parent has sort of a induced laziness when it comes to discipline. Today's parent is afraid to discipline in large measure because the mental health community demonized the discipline of children, and particularly any discipline that smacked of a traditional form. And so American parents today are trying to avoid disciplining their children like the plague.
So there's no outcome, there's no consequences, therefore the children behave the way they do. So I think, we see this, of course. So we as pediatric dentists we deal with this. We encounter this every day, and we've learned how to accommodate what we do. And we've had to respond to this cadre of parents who are now functioning in this way or dysfunctioning in this way. So, the question is, I've got a half an hour or 45 minutes to do a dental restoration or surgical procedure on a child, a 6-year-old who 30 years ago might have been much more easy to manage given the circumstances. How do I deal with that today? I can't change parenting. I can't change what this parent did. What kind of conversation can I have with that parent? I think I'd like to hear what you have to say about the conversation I can have given the scenario we're in today.
Well, both the child and the parent need to be dealt with authoritatively, because the parent is not your ally in this situation. And of course, I'm speaking generally. But the very parent who wants to come back into the operatory, first of all, that's likely to be a mother. The mother is reading the parenting books. The mother is ingesting all of this postmodern psychological parenting propaganda. She's the very person who should not be back in the operatory for that very reason. And you need to deal very authoritatively with her, and you need to deal very authoritatively with her child. And authority, Joel, I know our time is limited, so let me try and capsulize this as quickly as possible. In America today, we think authority is a matter of the use of consequences properly, the proper use of consequences. No, it's not. Authority is a presentation. And when I'm in front of an audience describing this, I give people a formula that makes that presentation for them very, very clear. Here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Here's how you properly present yourself as an authority figure to a child. And what I say over and over and over again in my audiences is a child's natural reaction to the proper presentation of authority is obedience, cooperation. He does what he's told. When parents tell me that their children don't do what they're told, I immediately know that these parents are not telling their children to do anything. They're doing what the typical American parent does today. They plead, bargain, bribe, cajole, reason, explain, encourage, suggest, and promise. As you can tell, I've memorized that. And
we should all memorize it.
Well, we should, because
we know it.
It's the honey. It would really help mommy if you would pick up your toys. Will you do that for mommy? Okay. This is and said from a crouching position, because the mother has been told that she should get down to her child's level when she speaks to her child, that this is in some way, shape, or form essential to her child not feeling intimidated. Well, in the first place, it's okay for children to feel intimidated, just like it's okay for an employee to feel slightly intimidated when he's in the presence of the CEO of the company. There's nothing wrong with feeling intimidated.
It's expected and normal. It's a normal response.
Right. It's a normal response to authority in certain contexts. But everything that smacked of traditional parenting was demonized, and the attempt was made to overhaul it. And so today's mothers are getting down in what is effectively a submissive position and talking to their children in a submissive, pleading tone of voice, an obsequious tone of voice, and they're not getting the result that they want. But they've been told by the parenting powers that be, which don't include me, because I'm a certified heretic in my profession, don't include me, that this is the way to do it. And this is why today's mother reports that she has frequent cerebral meltdowns. She's screaming and yelling and threatening, and then she feels horribly guilty, and she repents to her child, and around this very dysfunctional process goes. And, this is why I have a job. I mean, it's a very unfortunate situation. This is why I have a job, Joel.
Yeah. Well, you're a certified heretic who is beloved by all of us who encounter what you say every day. I want to pause for a moment for a word from our sponsor.
Hugh Freedy is the global leader in dental instrument manufacturing and infection prevention solutions that keep you performing at your best. For more information on Hugh Freedy products, visit hughfreedy.com/AAPD-crowns. That's hugh-freedy.com/AAPD-crowns. And enter the promo code 2682 if placing an order for pedo crowns.
We are back with John Rosemond, our favorite psychologist, who tells us what we encounter and what we see and explains the phenomena that are going on in the parenting profession, in parenting each day. John, I want to continue our conversation about the fact that parenting has changed. We all miss the quote-unquote good old days when kids were disciplined in a different way, and therefore their behavior would be different. Can you characterize this parenting as a function of generation groups such as millennials, Gen Y, baby boomers? Is that a fair characterization of the change over time?
Not really. It's just post-1960s. America became a postmodern progressive culture in the 1960s. And postmodernity is relativism, the lack of standards concerning just about everything. And so that's why we have very little agreement in America anymore concerning how to raise kids. And progressivism, the heart of that is the idea that new ideas are better than old ideas. And so people believe that because the ideas that I'm describing concerning the raising of children are new, they must be better. It's almost anathema to people to wrap their head around the idea that something was done 70 years ago that was actually being done better than it is being done today. But Joel, all of the statistics support that contention that it was being done better, the raising of children 70 years ago. The mental health of children in the 1950s, even when accounting for reporting error, 10 times better, conservative figure, 10 times better than the mental health of today's kids. The child and teen suicide rate, conservative figure, 10 times less than it is today. Kids were much, much happier when authority was being delivered in a much more functional way than it is being delivered today. And I believe, and the research verifies this, that children indeed feel a greater sense of well-being when they are in the presence of competent authority figures. So going back to the dental thing, I mean, it's all a matter of presentation. It's a matter of speaking in authoritative rather than persuasive ways. Instead of saying it would really help me if you would open your mouth, is to simply say, you need to open your mouth. It doesn't sound, in the milieu of today's parenting, the kind of presentation that I'm describing doesn't sound nice, but it accomplishes what you want to accomplish.
I think this goes back, John, to really not pediatric dentistry training, but training in dental school, where we learn how to be good technical dentists, how to be good scientific, academic dentists. But I think the failure historically has been in really one of the most important parts, whether it's kids or adults, and notwithstanding the changes in parenting, about communication. How do we talk to our patients? How do we talk to the parents? This affective domain, if you will, has been we've been negligent in education. And I think the parenting changes make it even more necessary that we talk about how to accommodate what we do, given the fact, like it or not, that those changes are there. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely fair. I tell parents when you're delivering instructions to your children, number one, you speak from a fully upright position. Number two, you use the fewest words possible. Number three, you preface the fewest words possible with authoritative phrases such as, you now need to, it's time for you to, you're now going to. Number four is you don't explain yourself, because explanations lead to pushback on the part of the child. This is what leads to argument, is the parent saying, I want you to do this because. Number five is the because is because I said so.
Right. That's all that should matter.
Right. That's all that should matter. You are a legitimate authority figure, whether you are a parent or a pediatric dentist. Your authority in that situation is fully legitimate. You do not need to justify your authority with an explanation.
It's like when air traffic control says descend to 17,000, you don't question them. You just do what they say. And I think we have to be like air traffic control with our kids. That form of management, it could be useful.
My son is a pilot, and it sounds like you may be, and that's exactly correct.
Yes. I'm a frustrated pilot, but I think there are a lot of analogies in aviation that would apply to us in healthcare for sure, certainly in emergency management. Do you see, looking forward, do you see any changes that parenting might be, that this is sort of a cycle, that's this directional change toward self-esteem building and lack of authority, lack of what we consider proper parenting of the past? Do you see it turning around in another direction, or is it continuing to go in this current direction?
Well, Joel, in answer to that question, when I was first starting out, dispensing my heresies here and there around the United States, it wasn't unusual for people to storm out of my presentations. On several occasions, people started shouting at me from the audience. On 2 occasions, my sponsors had to hire security because people were threatening to disrupt my presentation so that I wouldn't be allowed to speak. And what I have noticed in the years since is that people are beginning to realize that there's something wrong here, and that the mental health community hasn't changed their message since the early 1970s. They're still beating the same memes when it comes to the rearing of children, and that if things are going to change, that just perhaps the way to change things is through retro change, not progressive change. Mm-hmm. That we need to go back and we need to understand that there was something being done correctly 70 years ago that we're no longer doing. And if we want things to turn out for our children and ourselves properly, rightly, that we need to go back to a time when things were turning out that way.
To a certain extent, pediatric dentistry is like one of the best laboratories to study the effect of parenting and how it's changed and how it might go back to a different direction, because we see in a 30-minute window the results of parenting, good or bad. And we have to manage within that 30-minute window one way or another, and it's often today not an ideal circumstance. So we actually should be the laboratory for the psychological community. I don't know of a better one.
Well, you can do you can do a lot of very important modeling from mothers. What I find is that mothers are desperate these days. They're desperate, and at the same time, they don't know what to do, and they're afraid to step out of the box. So, what a pediatric dentist can do is model for a mother how to communicate with a child in a way that virtually guarantees cooperation, obedience from the child.
That's fantastic. Wow, this is so great, John. I want to ask you maybe a final comment, and I just, in reading your work, which, by the way, I encourage our listeners to go to John Rosemond's website. There's a wealth of information. His books are available online and, of course, through Amazon and other places, and there are some incredible ones. And if I had time, I'd go through my own observations, but they're really great reads and so pertinent to us. The phrase I like that you've said that we all know, maybe you could just conclude with this, is parents aren't their children's friends, they are their leaders. You said that today, but maybe we could talk about that in closing.
Well, leadership and relationship really don't mix very well. They're not very compatible. I tell parents all the time, you have a relationship with your child. You should not be striving to be in a relationship with your child, because when you cross that boundary between simply having a relationship and being in a relationship, the parent who says, my child and I are best friends, that I'm not impressed with at all. You shoot your ability to be an authority figure in the foot, and you're going to reap certain consequences that are not pleasant for either you or your child. We don't have time, but I talk about the seasons of parenting. There is a season for friendship with your child. It is after your child emancipates. To rush that is to play with fire.
Fantastic words for us. Thank you so much, John Rosemond, for being with us today. It was fantastic. And thank you for tuning into Pedo Teeth Talk, where we bring you the contemporary issues important to your practice, brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. Thanks to our listeners for listening today. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Pedo Teeth Talk is brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, the show that delivers cutting-edge ideas for the professional specializing in pediatric dentistry. If you have any questions or comments, please email info@aapd.org. We welcome your ideas for future shows and guests. For more information on the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, visit aapd.org.